Kansas just added a 20-point scorer to their roster in August. What?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Happy Monday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your hosts, my guy, Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Schade, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making us your first listen or watch. We want to remind you that you can catch every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all you everydayers out there and all the members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. So glad you're all here. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. In the dog days of summer, the sports stop sportsing like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Andy, coming up on the show today, first off, it's a sad day. The Olympics are over. You and I have been watching them like crazy. You're rocking your Team USA jersey there over your shoulder. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can see that John Stockton 12. Boy, that is a beautiful sight. But we're going to talk today about Kansas adding Diggy Coit over the weekend, one of the best nicknames out there in college basketball. As we just said, the Olympics are sadly over. It was a big showing for Kentucky in the Olympics, 1/4 of Team USA's men's squad bringing home gold. And then we're also going to look ahead to 2028 because that's a fun exercise. What schools, what conferences might be repped on Team USA? And it's going to be a super fun one, bittersweet with the Olympics getting done. But it means that we're ever closer to college basketball season. So, Andy, we got the news on Friday that David Diggy Coit was committing to Kansas. This is the second year in a row for the Jayhawks, adding a player kind of late in the summer after doing so with Johnny Furphy last year. This is wild to me because Kansas is already so loaded. Tell us a little bit, if you would, Mr. Patton, about Diggy and then what we need to know about him.
Yeah, Diggy Coit was available in the transfer portal. He entered the portal back in April, but the reason that there wasn't a lot of movement, that a player of his caliber, of his, who averaged 20 points a game, like we said, at Northern Illinois last year, the reason that he was still available is that he had been waiting on a waiver from the NCAA. Per John Rothstein of CBS, the waiver was approved and he was eligible for the upcoming season in mid-July, like July 17th. At that time, when he talked about it, he did a video interview, Coit did, and he kind of talked about how there was already programs that had expressed interest in him previously, kind of saying, hey, once, if you get that waiver approved, if that happens, like come talk to us, let us know. So that's why there wasn't like this big push. There wasn't this big kind of media circus around like, oh, this player's suddenly available, who's going to go after him? Because he'd kind of already had a lot of those conversations. And there were some other programs that were reportedly in the mix, at least initially. Arkansas was in the mix. Texas A&M was in the mix. Villanova had been in the mix at the time. But Kansas was really a team that had pursued him heavily very early in the process, even before they'd made a lot of the moves that they ended up making. And I think the connection that Bill Self and his staff was able to make with Coit kind of helped convince him to still head to Lawrence to play for the Jayhawks, even though Kansas really reloaded their backcourt in a significant way. And the playing time situation is far and away, to me at least, the most fascinating part of this conversation, because yes, mid-major guards, don't always translate over well to the next level. And certainly Kansas has brought in guards from the lower levels who didn't necessarily have a ton of success. Nick Timberlake last year is a fairly prominent example of that. But Coit is the guy who, 21 points a game last year. He averaged 3.5 assists a game. He averaged 3.2 rebounds per game. He had 4 30-point games last year. All of them were on the road. He averaged 9.6 three-point attempts per game. This dude is a pure shooter, scorer type. Now, he shot 33.7% from three, so he is not a highly efficient scorer necessarily, but I think generally you can kind of extrapolate a player who shoots an okay percentage from a super high volume coming into a system where they are going to take much less. He's not going to take 10 3-point attempts per game. Bill Self's going to have an aneurysm if that happens. But he is going to take a lot more open 3-point shots in this system because of the way the defense is going to defend him. So don't be surprised to see Coit take maybe 3 or 4 3-point attempts per game, shoot closer to 40%. That feels like a very realistic scenario here. And the relationship building that Self and Co were able to do is how they land a talented player into the mix in a very crowded backcourt here in early August.
Yeah, Andy. I mean, Friday when this news dropped, I was like, good grief, how do we still have a 20-point score at the D1 level floating around out there in the portal? But once we started digging into it, obviously it makes a ton of sense. In a way, obviously he's not the same player, but it kind of feels Max Asmus-y going from Oral Roberts to Texas, same kind of thing going from Northern Illinois to Kansas here.
Maybe an Antonio Reeves, except I think Reeves is like 6'5".
He's big.
Diggy Coit is 5'11". I don't know if we mentioned that, but I think that's an important part of the conversation.
Right.
He's not a big guy.
That's where I get the Max Asmus of it all. Is he's a little Mighty Mouse of a dude. And when I start thinking about it, Andy, I was like, why on earth would you want to go to Kansas, who already has 12 scholarship players, who's particularly in the backcourt? Well, first off, Bill Self is like, hey, look, we sucked to shoot the ball last year, period, but especially at the 2-guard position. I mean, that was one of the main storylines for you and I throughout the entire season. And now they're like, there's no way in all of God's green goodness, to quote Zoolander, that I am going to allow us to not be good at the shooting guard position again this year. And I know that Coit isn't really a 2 at 5'11", but the point remains that they're going to be better shooters in the backcourt than they were this year. Andy, you start looking at this and it's like, why would you commit to Kansas when they already have a ton of depth? To me, that tells me that Coit cares a lot more about the name on the front of the jersey and the team's success than he does about continuing to score 20 points a game, right? And if I'm Bill Self, I'm elated about that, as we so often talk about, where schools aren't using, or are using 11 scholarships in this day and age. And he comes in as number 13. And I don't think he's going to be number 13 on the depth chart by any stretch of the imagination. I think this dude's going to play, but we got to wait and see what some of that is. So as we look at this all coming together, Andy, we've got now 13 scholarships, 6 returners in KJ Adams, Zach Clements. I'm going alphabetically by last name here. Hunter Dickinson, DeJuan Harris, and Marco Jackson, who obviously is on the shelf a little bit right now. Jamari McDowell, and then the 2 freshmen coming in. I'm really excited about both of these guys, Flory Badunga and Raquise Passmore. And then you've got all these 6 now transfers coming in: Zeke Mayo, AJ Storr, Rylan Griffin, Shaquille Moore, and now Coit as well. And then you get in, what's his name? Shelby from Rice.
Noah Shelby.
Noah Shelby, thank you, who is redshirting this year. So, Andy, just a ton of talent for Kansas.
Yeah, and I think the nice thing is you're going to see a lot of 3-guard lineups, and I think that depends on whether you consider AJ Storr a guard or a wing. He's obviously can kind of play that wing spot, but he's going to play a lot at the 3. I think you're probably going to see
KJ,
maybe Mayo, maybe Griffin playing a little bit at the 3 as well. Like I think there are going to be some situations where you have a lot of those guards out there all at once, but like Coit is the smallest out of this group, but I think you're going to see him have a role. And I think you're absolutely right. He envisioned himself being in a Kansas uniform. That was kind of his goal, his hope for this offseason. Yes, there's more talent in the mix than there was when they were first contacting him, back in April, May, earlier in the transfer portal season. But I think this is a good fit for Kansas, certainly. And for Coit, yeah, maybe there's other places he could have gone that had more playing time, but it's not like it's as easy to make that call now as it would have been 4 months ago. Sure, 4 months ago, if Kansas's roster looked like this and he committed there, we might have been a lot more baffled. But at this point, it's like a lot of teams already have 10, 11, 12 guys already filled. And sure, there are teams that have roster spots available, but how many of them have even a semblance of a rotation spot available? I don't know that there are all that many schools that at this point have obvious holes in their backcourt. Certainly injuries could impact that in some capacity, but for Coit, if you're wanting to make a commitment, you're not wanting to wait around and hope that, somebody gets hurt and you can step into a bigger role somewhere. You go pick the school that you want to go to, and who wouldn't want to go play at Kansas? I mean, it's a tremendous school. It's a tremendous organization. He's obviously had a close connection with that coaching staff. And, he probably, I don't know what he's thinking about his professional future or whatnot, but maybe it's not the best place to land if you want to carve out a big enough playing time to get into the NBA, but you could go win a championship, and that's pretty cool. And if you're trying to pick a school that has a good good chance of winning a championship next year, there's not any list that don't have Kansas in one of those top 3 or 4 options. So I think this makes a lot of sense, even though on paper it's definitely like, I'm not sure he's going to play a whole lot there. But there's a lot of reasons that I think this does make sense for Diggy and certainly for Bill Self and the Jayhawks.
And we are still looking at it as a reminder. He's not Elmarko Jackson, obviously, but Elmarko Jackson getting hurt. They're still trying to figure out how do we piece that together. Riley Kugel initially committed, then backed off, went to Mississippi State, right? Which is funny because Shaquille Moore came from Mississippi State right after the Elmarko Jackson injury. And Andy, one other quick thing before we move on, just as a reminder here, as part of the self-imposed penalties Kansas took on as part of the IARP investigation, Kansas has to be 1 under the scholarship limit either this year or next. Coit making it 13 now means that will have to happen next season. Andy, kind of the loophole here, though, for Kansas is, remember, these new scholarship allowances seem like they're going to go through, which means it's probably going to be up to 15. Yes, Kansas would have to be 1 under that, but you still get 14 dudes at that point. So honestly, if I'm Kansas, I'm like, joke's on you, jokers. So just keep that in mind, that this means that Kansas next year will have to be 1 under the scholarship limit.
Well, Isaac, as you said, the Olympics are unfortunately over. Team USA, however, did take home gold medals in both men's and women's 5-on-5 basketball, and it wasn't easy. Neither of them were easy. They took down the home country, France, on both sides of the thing here, and it was close battles throughout. It's no shock Kentucky is bringing home a trio of gold medals. We're going to talk about that and what other schools and conferences were represented with gold medals over in France. All that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, let's talk about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. That's the formula for winning championships or gold medals, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits to LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. Plus, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home that W. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, Isaac, the 2024 Olympic Games in Paris, France are over. So much fun and excitement over the last couple of weeks, not just from the basketball perspective. There was a ton of record-breaking events. There was so much excitement on the track side, the swimming side, gymnastics, of course, always driving a lot of the attention there. But from a basketball perspective, the expectation on the 5-on-5 side, I'm going to talk a little bit on the 3-on-3 side, where Team USA did not particularly do all that well. But for 5-on-5, everybody expected that the men's and women's teams from Team USA would win gold, and they did. Neither of them did it as easily as I think they were expected to. Certainly, they needed some late game heroics from Steph Curry, who looked like vintage Steph Curry to the nth degree in that game on Saturday against France. Helped secure a victory there. Had 3 3-pointers in the closing 2 minutes. Put away France, a talented team with Wembanyama and Rudy Gobert and Nick Batum and others. And then on the women's side, not as much theatrics at the end of the game, although France hit what would have been a game-tying 3-point shot, except that
she was so close.
Yeah, she was like 9-10 inches inside the 3-point line. That was tough to see for France. Nice to see Team USA secure the victory there. Some excitement in that regard. Isaac, what was your impression of just the Olympics this year? I know there was a lot of conversation about it, and we don't want to dig too far into it because we do want to talk a little bit on the college side of things. But I got to tell you, the fact that the games were competitive, the gold medal games in particular, it made them a lot more fun to watch. I'm kind of glad Team USA didn't win both these games by like 25 points.
Absolutely. And let's go back to at least on the men's side, back to the semifinal as well, Andy, like that down 17. And make that comeback. And how about Steph in his first Olympics being the hero in both? And I think, Andy, that's where my first kind of college tie-in is I just remember back, I was in my postgraduate studies when Davidson went on their run, and to look back to that team and that little diminutive guard who couldn't get the high D1 offers, despite the fact that his dad is an NBA stud, to come through everything he has, to have all the success at Davidson and at Golden State, And now to step on this stage and do this, I mean, that shooting performance in the first quarter of the semifinal game and those last couple minutes of the championship, Andy, was something I will never forget watching. Well done, Steph Curry.
Yeah, I would add on that too. I was watching this game on Saturday. My parents are in town. They've moved back to where we are because we have our 5-month-old daughter, and they've finally been able to actually like move, and they were a couple states away. They're now here. So it was very kind of the first weekend we got to spend with them living here. And we were doing some house projects in the front yard. My dad and I were, and we stopped to watch the game. And my wife and my daughter came out, and my mom came out, and the 5 of us were huddled around my little iPad in the garage, watching Steph Curry just go crazy in those final few minutes. That shot, that rainbow shot he hit over Batum to steal the game. And of course the good night that he gave to the French crowd. I mean, I'm never going to forget that. And I'm always going to associate it with my parents moving back to Oregon, you know, a place that they haven't lived full time for 5 years. And so it was a really kind of special weekend for me because of that. And I got to thank Steph Curry as much as somebody who's a Gonzaga alumni. We don't typically like to give a lot of credit to Steph Curry, who knocked out Gonzaga in 2008. But seeing Steph Curry and Mark Few give each other a big hug after that game was cathartic for a lot of Zag fans as well. It was a cool moment.
Andy, I loved the flip view. I didn't notice this in real time, but on the one where he was double teamed, the good night one, literally wide open on the other wing were both KD and LeBron. With their hand.
He's the only player in the world who can get away with not passing the ball to those two guys.
100%. And so I absolutely loved it. And then you had that whole crew. It was like Jimmy Fallon, Sha'Carri Richardson, and Carmelo sitting right there. Just great stuff. So, Andy, congrats to both teams on these dubs. And excited. I know we're going to talk 2028 here in a minute, but it was just neat to see just the veteran laden dudes make one go of it together in Steph's first rotation. And so, like, for KD, man, to have 4 golds, and I saw Rodney Terry post a picture with him back in the Texas days. And so it's just neat to see all those ties back into this side of college basketball. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties into looking at what schools did have some gold medal, what schools brought home some hardware, and looking at it for all 4 of the sports, the men's basketball 5-on-5 and 3-on-3, and then same on the women's side, there were 6 schools that had multiple people bringing home gold medals, and we are counting coaches. If you are a current head coach, even if you were an assistant coach in the Olympics, we're going to count them here in this category. And the 3 schools that had 3 or more Olympians were exactly who you would expect them to be, Isaac. It's Kentucky, Duke, and UConn. Like, not a surprise whatsoever there. Kentucky, of course, all 3 of their gold medal winners were on the men's basketball 5-on-5 side. That's Anthony Davis, Bam Adebayo, and Devin Booker there. We're going to talk again 2028. There's probably going to be more Kentucky alumni potentially winning gold. They got some guys who we think are going to be competing in that roster in a few years. On the Duke side, you have Jason Tatum. Of course, there's a lot of conversation about Jason Tatum's lack of playing time throughout this Olympic series. On the women's side, Chelsea Gray went to Duke, and then Kara Lawson was an assistant coach for the women's team. She is the head coach for Duke. And then on the UConn side, it was all women's basketball players. Again, not a real shock considering how great that program has been. Diana Taurasi, Nafisa Collier, and Brianna Stewart on that side. And then a couple teams that had 2, Oregon, Sabrina Ionescu, and then Elisa Mevius played for the German 3-on-3 team that won gold. She is a transfer from Siena who is transferring to Oregon this year. So she hasn't actually played for the Ducks yet, but we're going to count her because she is going to be on Kelly Graves' team next year. Notre Dame, Jackie Young and Jewel Lloyd on the women's side. And then Gonzaga, Sonny Greinacher played on that same German 3-on-3 team that won the gold for the women's side. And then, of course, Mark Few was the assistant coach for Team USA and, of course, been the head coach at Gonzaga since George W. Bush was president.
It's so crazy. And we also broke this thing down by conference. And, we saw a lot during the Olympics of, like, for example, the ACC trying to claim Stanford's Katie Ledecky, who did not swim at Stanford when they were in the ACC. So we're looking at this appropriately. What conference were these guys in when they actually played? SEC led the way with 4, those 3 Kentucky guys, and Georgia's Anthony Edwards, who, by the way, is going to be a dude in the next one. Big 12 was second with Joel Embiid from Kansas, KD, who we just talked about from Texas, and Tyrese Halliburton from Iowa State. More on him in just a minute. Pac-12 We had 2 there, Drew Holiday from UCLA and Derek White, obviously from Colorado. Jason Tatum, the lone ACC rep from Duke. Steph Curry, let's remember, Davidson was in the SoCon back then, not in the A10 like they are now. And then obviously LeBron would be the 12th, who went to the College of Hard Knocks. I don't know. He didn't go to school.
St. Mary's College.
Yes, there it is. That last class before things went to one and done.
Yeah.
Andy, anything else? Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't have much more to add here. Obviously, it's funny to see how many of these programs are no longer, like there's no Big Ten on this list, but UCLA is now in the Big Ten, so they would count in the future. But yeah, not having anybody from the Big Ten, I think, is the only thing that really stands out to me. Also, not having any Big East schools. We're going to talk about that in the next segment. There's a handful of Big East guys that I think are very likely going to be on the 2028 Team USA competing in LA.
Crazy stuff. Speaking of which, Andy, as we've said multiple times, obviously the 24 Olympics are now over, but 2028 is coming to LA. What schools might be repped on our home turf for Team USA? We're going to talk about that in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel, man, we love sports. We never want them to stop like the Olympics just did. But in the dog days of summer, the good news is that even though the sports aren't sportsing like we want them to, FanDuel lets you keep them going whenever you want. All you got to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. We were just talking about Kansas adding Diggy Coit. What does that do to their national championship odds? I don't know that they've been updated, but right now, Duke, UConn, and Kansas are all tied for the best odds at plus 1,000, followed by Alabama at plus 1,300. Houston at plus 1,600, and then Baylor, North Carolina, and Gonzaga all at plus 2,000. So if you want to get in on that action or anything else, man, just go on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. We're going to continue our Olympics conversation, moving ahead instead of looking back. It's almost like a way too early top 25 or going straight into predicting the next year's draft like we do the day after this year's draft. And so, Andy, one of the storylines is that, we were just saying it was the last ride, the last hurrah for a lot of these guys who are getting older. We don't expect to see KD or Braun or Steph, several of these other guys. And so, in fact, looking ahead, the Olympic rosters are 12 deep. We expect, assuming health and normal continuation of their skills, Tyrese Halliburton probably back, Jason Tatum probably back, Anthony Edwards, good grief, Devin Booker, probably Bam Adebayo, maybe Embiid, maybe or Anthony Davis. Obviously, those guys are both a little bit injury prone and are going to be getting towards their mid-30s there. But I think, assuming things go well, Hallie, Tatum, Edwards, Booker, and Bam are probably safe bets to be there. They've been in the system. I think that's a big part of it as well. I think we're getting off of Steve Kerr. I think maybe Spoelstra will probably be the coach in 28. But Andy, looking ahead to that, obviously there's no end of guys who can fill out however many roster spots need to be filled out. But let's start going through this thing. We've kind of broken it down by conference of some of the potentials who we think might be on that 28 roster in La La Land.
Yeah, and I think, you want to look at maybe guys who played for the select team. I think that's certainly a part of it. They typically take guys who play on that select team and end up putting them on the Olympics the following year. I believe Halliburton was on the select team in 2020. I think he was, and maybe Booker was as well. There's definitely a few guys who ended up making this roster who were on that select team previously. So there's a couple guys who we're going to talk about who are in that mix as well. But starting with the ACC, we picked 4 guys that we think could end up being Olympians with Team USA in 2028. Zion Williamson and Paolo Banchero, both from Duke. Zion, obviously, health is the key there, and continued development of skills. Like if he's healthy in 2028, but he hasn't necessarily reach the expectations that a lot of folks have for him, that could be a question there. Paolo seems to me like a lock in terms of just the offensive skill that he provides. He's a guy who, isn't necessarily a role player. He's more of a ball dominant guy, but I think could fill a role or could just be one of the guys. Him and Edwards being the guys for Team USA, I think puts them in a pretty good position in 28. And then you have Donovan Mitchell, who's kind of in that conversation as one of the other 2 guards, and Scotty Barnes, maybe a little bit more kind of outside the
working
what
in.
a lot of places are projecting, but a Florida State alumni there, Mitchell from Louisville, and I could see both of them kind of competing for role spots on that roster.
Andy, what do you think about Zion? You think he can get his body under control and be ready to go?
The fact that he hasn't yet is definitely concerning. I think this upcoming NBA season kind of feels like a make or break for him in a lot of ways. The talent is there, and I think that's something that for folks who don't watch a lot of the NBA, like when he plays, he's really good. Like the fact that he's like hasn't lived up to the number one NBA draft prospect is not because of his play on the floor. It's because he hasn't been on the floor enough. So if he can find a way to do it, the skill is very clearly there. He's got to find a way to stay healthy and put in the work necessary to be that level of athlete that we know he's capable of being. But the talent is still there.
Yeah, agreed. Projecting the Big 12, we have just one player there, Cade Cunningham from Oklahoma State. We'll see how that goes. We mentioned already that there were no Big 10 guys getting gold medal, or ladies, I guess I should say. Interestingly, Andy, we don't have any projected here either in this 28 projection. Obviously, this is way out ahead of it, but that's just so interesting. And you might be screaming into your computer or phone, what about Zach Edey? Well, he's Canadian, everybody, so calm down. And so, there's just nobody that we really forecast on that, and that's kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, we read a couple articles that kind of showed like some of their projections for 28, and the only name we saw that from the Big Ten that made some sense is Keegan Murray, and maybe he plays up to that level and gets into that conversation, but I'm not super optimistic that he will. So yeah, I mean, Franz Wagner came from Michigan, and he's fantastic, but he's German, and he played for Team Germany this year. So again, I think the combination of just a lot of their best players are not from the United States, but it is odd to not have a Big Ten representative, even seemingly lined up for 2028.
I just thought about this, Andy. We haven't mentioned this name. I wonder what Terrence Shannon Jr. is going to be like over the next couple of years.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
His
bigger
scoring
guard, decent defender, he could be in that conversation.
Yeah. Andy, you mentioned in the last time we also didn't have any Big East guys repped this past time, but it's kind of shocking, given all of Villanova's success, in the Jay Wright era at least, that we didn't have any Nova guys. But man, Jalen Brunson has really made a name for himself these last couple years in the NBA, and Mikal Bridges is such a valuable, diverse skill set type of guy that I think either or both of them are very worthy of consideration for that 28 squad.
Yeah, I've seen Josh Hart's name tossed around as well, and I'm not as confident about Josh Hart, but he's a role player who could fit if they were down to the last one or two spots and they needed a guy. He definitely fills a role that could be in that conversation. And then we're going Pac-12 because it was still the Pac-12 when both Jaime Jaquez from UCLA was there and when Jaylen Brown was there at Cal. Jaylen Brown did not play in the ACC. Jaime Jaquez did not play in the Big Ten, so they count as Pac-12 alumni, and I think both of them. Jaylen Brown, a lot of people were surprised he wasn't named to that final spot replacing Kawhi, when in fact his teammate Derek White got that spot instead. Brown seems like a very likely candidate, and Jaquez I wouldn't be surprised as well, especially considering he's not a ball dominant guy, and you're kind of looking for those role player types to fill that spot, and he already showed he can do that really well with Miami last year, and I think he's going to continue to be a piece that they consider for one of those spots.
Andy, we move to the final power conference, the SEC, and this is the one that probably unshockingly has the most potential candidates, at least in our purview. 3 guys from Kentucky and 2 from the Nate Oates Roll Tiders. We've got from Kentucky, De'Aaron Fox, Tyrese Maxey, Karl Anthony Towns. Out of that group, I don't know who I would think is the most likely. Maybe De'Aaron.
I think I might go Maxey, to be honest, but
really?
It's between Maxey and Fox because I just don't think Anthony Towns' skill set is as necessary based on who we think is going to be back for them.
That's right. I agree with that. And then from Bama, Brandon Miller, all the skill and capability in the world. We saw that on display 2 years ago in college. I think some of that's just going to be, how does he continue to progress the next couple of years? And then Herb Jones, and that would be clearly a defensive decision for Team USA. But man, if they need his defense, that's somebody I could go after. But I'm really curious to see how Brandon Miller continues to grow.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Brandon Miller is in that mix there. He was on that select team, and I think deserves a spot if he continues to progress the way we expect him to. And then a couple mid-majors, 3 from the WCC, 1 from the Ohio Valley Conference. From the WCC, it's a pair of Zags, Chet Holmgren and Jalen Suggs. Suggs was on that select team. He's kind of would be that Drew Holiday, Derek White type of replacement. If his three-point shooting continues to progress, he's a borderline lock, assuming health, of course, just because of the skill set that he would be able to bring to that team. Chet, I feel like, is also a lock, again, assuming health for him. You need two-way bigs. You need bigs who can defend away from the rim. You need shot blockers. You need floor spacers. Chet literally brings all of that. So I think that he's as much of a lock as you can be without having participated with Team USA up to this point in his career. And then Jalen Williams from Santa Clara, I think, has to be in this conversation as well. He's been so dynamic with Oklahoma City, has just played exceptionally well, is a do-it-all forward, plays both sides of the ball really well. I would cautiously toss Brandon Pajemski into that conversation as well. Needs to kind of continue to develop in a way that needs to show that progression, and I think he's capable of doing so. And he was on that select team as well. And then from the OVC, it's Ja Morant from Murray State. If Ja stays healthy, he's
and you mean that mentally healthy?
Yes, yeah. There's some off the floor stuff there, and I could see Team USA not necessarily chomping at the bit to add him if they don't feel like some of those things have resolved. We are talking about 4 years from now. So there's a very good chance that he could mature. And from a basketball talent perspective, I mean, he's otherworldly good. So you'd want him on your roster if you think it's worth the potential risks and downsides in that area.
Yeah, 100%. And Andy, as we look at that, as you were talking, I just going back to the gold medal game. The U.S. men's basketball team's win over France averaged 19.5 million viewers on NBC and Peacock, the most watched gold medal game since the 96 Olympics. Game peaked at 22.7 million viewers from 5 to 5:15 p.m. So, man, people were all in on this thing. You love to see it. Andy, just one other that, we're also thinking, are there any guys that are in college right now that could be in the Olympics discussion for Team USA? And I think the only one, and we haven't even seen him play a second of college basketball yet, is Cooper Flagg. Part of that goes back to what you were saying about being on the U.S. select team already. Part of that is we already see that skill set with this young man, a little bit of a do-it-all guy who could really, really help. If he is who we think he is, that could be really interesting to see. But, man, all eyes are going to be on Wemby and how he and France continue to progress, because that dude is an alien. And so, man, just really, really neat to see them get to where they did and to see how much it meant to them on their home turf.
Well, speaking of incoming freshman, VJ Edgecombe, very likely going to represent the Bahamas, as he already did. And Isaac, closing out the show very quickly, speaking of the Bahamas, a wild story coming out of George Mason. The Patriots had a trip scheduled, a foreign tour. We've seen a lot of schools go on these foreign tours. They were scheduled to go to the Bahamas, play some games out there, get an opportunity to bond as a team, spent something like, I think it was like $150, $180, $200,000 to go on this trip, gave it to a company called the VI Group. And it just didn't happen. Apparently they showed up at the airport expecting to fly out to the Bahamas and play some basketball games, and there was no itinerary. There was no tickets. There was nothing. So it's a really sad story for George Mason. Obviously, higher profile programs going on trips like this, they can probably stomach the $200,000 that it costs to make this kind of trip work. George Mason, that's a lot of cash. So I feel for them. It was wild to see this. It's kind of given Fire Festival 2.0 vibes here. And so it was a kind of insane story we saw over the weekend that got a little overshadowed by a lot of other things going on in basketball and Team USA and all that. But I wanted to make sure we mentioned this story for George Mason and hope that they can kind of regroup and figure out what they want to do with the rest of their summer, because this is a sad situation all around for them. That is going to wrap it up. It's a sad way to wrap up the show, but hey, it's one of those things that happens. Hopefully we'll get some more updates on this George Mason situation as it continues to develop. But folks, want to thank all of you for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day as we get into another fantastic week, a post-Olympic week here on Locked On College Basketball. We still got some super fun stuff coming your way. We got a great interview coming your way from Isaac. We're going to have our guy Leaf Tulane back on the show, have some more fun conversations about late transfer portal stuff. If there's more of that coming, we got some recruiting updates as well. Start getting you ready for this upcoming season. As always, apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, whole bunch of them in the Olympics. And until Tuesday, as always, peace out.